queen. Not a fantastic card for my hand, but not really that terrible. For one thing, it's just wildly unlikely that he actually has a queen in his hand. What kind of queen would like this flop and turn at all? I mean, even a loose passive player is probably not cold calling you with queen 5. Uh, Queen 9 would be weird, and he'd have to have floated the flop for that. Doable, I guess, but really, if he's got that, he's got that. He can also be slow playing a straight or whatever, or slow playing a set. Really, it doesn't matter. One thing we're not doing is check calling versus a loose passive player, because versus a guy like that, we're actually better off check folding, but we're not really going to check fold this either. So in this spot, it's clearly better with a pot-sized bet left in a stack, which we set ourselves up for, to just shove and hope that worse hands call, than it would be to check and try and pick off a bluff. If you think that he will bluff, and at the time I was pretty sure that he wouldn't, but I could be wrong, it's a better idea to check, but still, it's blind versus blind. People have an awful lot of hands that they don't fold in these situations. I say just go for value and let them figure out what they're going to call with. So here I shoved, and he thought for like less than 2 seconds again and called with 9-6. One of the spots where a year ago I probably wasn't a good enough player to get his entire stack in with a hand like that. Especially on that river, but it's one of those things that you should learn to do. So moving on to the next hand, this one is going to be a little bit later, a couple of orbits. False Brainwash on my right, who's a very good pro, final table to million twice, I believe, at least twice, who raises in the hijack, and I've got kings in the cutoff. What do? I actually try not to re-raise often before the antes start. Mostly it's because of a style thing. I would like to ideally be one of the people that 3-bets 20% of hands and gets away with it, but frankly there's like less than a handful of people in poker that can 3-bet 20% and actually be successful and pull it off. I'm not very good at that, I freely admit it, and here I've got position and a big pair, and just as importantly, a guy in the big blind that's going to be shoving his 12 bets a lot, and might even induce Brainwash to come over the top with something like ace-queen. So clearly this is a spot that I think is a call and not a 3-bet. If you 3-bet only aces and kings in this spot, you should probably switch to either 3-betting nothing at all or 3-betting a whole bunch of hands. Especially before the antes, I recommend just not bothering. Anyway, I call flop ace-queen 3, pretty much a terrible flop for my hand, but I'm still ahead of Brainwash's range here. It's just that, aside from that, I'm really not getting paid by any kind of a worse hand ever. So when I call here, it's basically just because I'm probably still ahead. If he fires a second barrel on the turn, I fold. He doesn't, and we obviously check it through because I'm really not interested in bluffing in this spot. River queen, he checks again, and interesting decision here. I'm certainly not getting paid off by an ace at this point because he just very rarely has one. Although I don't totally rule out something like ace-10. But more importantly, he could very well be playing a queen this way and be playing a check raise the river, which is actually a nice play for him. Prior to this river, if it came like a 4 or something, or maybe even, or like some other flavor of brick, I would definitely kind of small value bet it on the end, even against Brainwash, because it's very rare that somebody just folds like Queen Jack to this. For one thing, it does have showdown value. For another, I am not playing this like an ace, and there are very few aces I would cold call with in this spot. So it is a clear value bet on the river if it's not a queen, I think, but with a queen, it's probably best to simply check behind one more time because a bunch of his hands, if he were to check call the river, just got there. I check and win against eights. Nothing special, but something that kind of should be looked at. Next hand, much further on at a new table. With the big blind sitting out, as you can see here, folded to Canby on the button, who raises as he will with basically any two cards in this spot. So I happen to have Queen-Jack suited. A hand that I don't really want to 3-bet because I know he'll 4-bet light sometimes at least, and we are too deep to do that. I also don't really want to fold either. That leaves us with calling. Certainly a spot where I can probably play it profitably. I would actually make a stupidly nitty fold with Queen-Jack offsuit or something, just because I could play a lot of less flops aggressively. Here, at any rate, clearly worth seeing a flop with, but probably not worth 3-betting. Went ahead and called. Against a lot of players in this spot who can't really 4-bet light, go ahead and 3-bet. I think they'll be folding like 80% of the time, and that'll make it profitable in a vacuum with like almost any two. Anyway, I call, hit my top pair, check, planning to check, call, bet, or possibly check raise depending on the bet size. Goes check, check. Turn brick. Against Canby here, a bet is probably not worth it. He'll certainly not shove too light with no antes in the pot, and given that my hand is kind of relatively strong. There are two flush draws on the board, but there's absolutely nothing else of any interest. And I kind of just want to get a mistaken value bet out of him at this point. Ideally, my goal for this hand now is to catch him firing a barrel with worse, and then to fire my own barrel on the river and maybe get a couple of thousand, or even like 1,500 or so would be nice. But I won't be too disappointed if he just checks behind and I lead the river and he calls with something much worse. Really, because only aces really scare me on the river. Kings, not really that much. And seriously, his range is so wide in that spot that he completely missed the flop. I'm just not very worried, and I might as well check one more time and see what happens. He checks behind, river another 8. At this point, I'm like 100% morally certain that I have the best hand. Checking a third time seems reasonably pointless, so I just go ahead and bet he folds. Against some people, I actually would check a third time, just because it looks so incredibly weak, and they do make hopeless bluffs. Against Canby, I think he's probably not going to do that versus me. I'm perfectly capable of checking anything, including quads in that spot, if it induces a bet from him, but I just didn't think it was going to happen. Next hand is basically an exercise in pretty much tournament math, and the answer is probably going to be totally familiar to some of you, and it's going to surprise a bunch of you. Folded to a guy who I happen to have seen around a bunch of times on the button. Let's assume for now that he's a decent tournament player, and he pushes in 8 bets. We can safely assume that he knows I'm tight since he's seen me around, but probably, I'm not sure how much more he's seen on me, but that should be enough. And let's also assume that he knows who Canby is and probably is shoving a little bit tighter than usual, since he knows at least one of us will look him up a little lighter than usual. But regardless, it's still 8 bets with no antes, so we can say that he's pushing a little bit tighter than like the nearly 100% he should push. What range is he shoving here? I've got a nice little installation of Poker Stove here. And Poker Stove, certainly he's pushing any pair, etc., etc., etc. Any suited king, any suited queen. So probably pushing 5-4 suited. These are all conservative ranges, as you can see here. I happen to think that a good player will often push wider than that, even with no antes. But certainly a fairly wide range. This actually happens to be about the top 53% of all hands. Now, pot odds when it gets folded to me, all I have to do is win this hand 42% of the time, so this is a clear